All right, good morning or evening or whatever time it is whenever I get this thing out. Sorry, it's late. It's been a process. Got to figure it out. Here we go. So we're going to talk about a few things during this lecture. Kafka's Metamorphosis and Uzan's diary even, of a madman. So we'll tell you that I promised you that there would also be a discussion assignment because since we're going to be in class, I want you to have an opportunity to discuss with your classmates, and so we will still do that. What that's going to look like is in Blackboard, there is a article for you to read that I posted in there. You can also download it. I've pasted it in there in case you just want to read it and discuss it in Blackboard. So what we're going to do is you're going to read that article. It's about 10 pages, and it's about fantasy and the purpose of fantasy over time and how it's functioned in the past. And now as we've come sort of through the Enlightenment and now into modernism, as fantasy became popular again in a notified genre, a respected genre, we're going to read about like some of what those authors think the purpose of fantasy is, and sort of how does it function? How did it function then? How does it function now? What does it do for us as people and as a culture? You're going to read that article, and then there will be a discussion post as well that should be available around the same time that the article becomes available, sometime Wednesday evening. And it's going to ask you, kind of to summarize a little bit about what the article says about fantasy, and then it's also going to ask you to say what you think. How do you think fantasy functions in society? And by fantasy, I don't mean just like imagination. I mean like the literary forms of fantasy. So Lord of the Rings, things that include magic, like The Hobbit or Harry Potter. Even things like superhero movies, right? I mean that's fantasy. There's magic, people having superpowers. Sometimes it's science fiction, sometimes it's just pure fantasy. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about Franz Kafka. He's of Jewish descent, and he studied Jewish tradition. He struggled a lot with his relationships with women. He was engaged 3 times and twice to the same person, and every single time he backed out. He couldn't commit. He just always had a difficult time with those types of relationships. His relationship with his father was also really tense. His father sort of pressed him into the business world, and his father never understood why Kafka enjoyed writing, why he thought that would be a career, so to speak. And so he received a lot of criticism from his father and never received support. So that made his relationship with his father pretty tense. In spite of that tension with his father, he was a successful businessman. He sort of owned his own business. He was very much in the business world. And he was successful. I mean, he made a living that way. And at the same time, he was writing these novels. But because he wasn't getting the support from his family, he really wasn't finishing them. He had a lot of these stories and things that just kind of sat undone. He wasn't at home writing. He wasn't taking care of he wasn't pursuing his dream or his passion. So what that meant for him is that he felt like he had to go to work. Kafka lived with this, sort of pressure from his family, and just wasn't very happy with himself. He didn't really respect himself because he knew he wasn't following his dreams. And it was to the point where he didn't feel like his novels really had the attention that they deserved. And so he told his friend, on his deathbed, to burn all his novels. And his friend said, okay. Then he died, and his friend had them published. So that's where the metamorphosis comes from. But lastly, Kafka always felt like a little bit of an outsider because he was Jewish. He was a German-speaking Jew, but he also had this Czechoslovakian background. So he never felt like he identified with the people around him. And we see that a bit in the metamorphosis, right? I mean, there's some allusion in there. There's one grand metaphor of him as this bug and him being an outsider, not feeling like he fits in, not being accepted by his own family. You can see a lot of things sort of cross-pollinating between his life and this story. And he's trying to express what life was like for him at that point. I don't like how I said that. He was expressing how life was for him at that point. And it was coming through in this story. So to further my point, Kafka himself says that the terror of art is that the dream reveals the reality. Meaning that, this fantasy actually reveals something about what's actually going on in culture or in his life, or et cetera, and so forth, right? And we see that a lot in the metamorphosis, right? He's becomes this bug. He's secluded from his family. He doesn't feel like he can communicate. Doesn't feel like he can connect. Similarities to his life, right? So let's jump into the metamorphosis. In the metamorphosis, we have this man named Gregor. Right from the beginning, he wakes up and he is a bug. Not just like a bug or a fly or whatever. If you saw that movie, The Fly, with that guy, Goldblum, whatever his first name is, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like this slow transformation. It was overnight. He goes to bed, Gregor wakes up, Gregor bug. You get right from the beginning, he wakes up, he's on his back, and he's slowly figuring out that he's not who he went to bed as. Now he's bug guy. So he starts to notice not just his body, but then he starts talking, and he hears this sort of animalistic voice, and he realizes, like, okay, not only does my body feel weird, but my voice feels weird. And so he starts to rock back and forth, trying to get out of bed, and there's that whole scene of him, thumping out of bed or whatever. Also, let me go back. He's not just a fly. He's like a cockroach. So for those of us who live in Florida, I think that's all of us, we don't like cockroaches. So this story is kind of like a little difficult to read because it's gross. So if you look on page 213 or on 207 in the third edition, there's a great example here of stream of consciousness writing, which we had talked about that being sort of a feature of modernism because of that focus on individuality and just the valuing of someone else's perspective. So right there in that paragraph says, then he said to himself, before it strikes 7:15, I must absolutely have gotten myself out of bed, etc., etc., etc. And now he set himself to rocking his body out of the bed as evenly as possible along his entire length. His greatest concern was what to do about the loud crash that would clearly result, no doubt, calling forth, not prep, blah, blah, blah. So the point is that stream of consciousness, because not only are we seeing his actions, we're seeing them kind of as he's thinking about them. And also, as he's saying things aloud, what do we actually hear out there in the world? A bunch of bug-google. So then if you look at the next page, then we get this sort of commentary on his work. And so he's talking about how concerned he is, how worried he is about the fact that he's going to miss work. And as you know, further in the story, his boss comes to check on him and kind of see, like, hey, what's going on? And because he's worried. Gregor has this whole internal dialogue with his boss, even though his boss just hears, like, crickles and crackles or whatever. But it's just interesting that Gregor has become a bug, but what he's really concerned about is not as so much the fact that he's a bug, but more so the fact that he can't go to work, which is interesting. So then further, what's interesting is the fact that his father, the whole time, is sort of angry with him. He's angry because Gregor helps provide for his family, right? He goes to work and he earns money. His father can't earn enough to provide for the whole family. So his father's not just angry that he's a bug, he's also angry that he can't support the family like he's supposed to. And so that's a really interesting dynamic because if you think about Kafka's life, he and his father disagreed on exactly that, right? He wanted to be a writer and his father wanted him to be a businessman, which was a way to earn a living, and writing was not a way to earn a living, or so his father thought. So yeah, you see the connections, right? There it is. Boom, boom, A, B, whatever. So as the story progresses, what we see is this gradual distancing of his family. So his sister is continuously coming in and taking care of him. At first, his mother helps too. She slowly starts to distance herself because she can't, it's gross, whatever, she can't handle it. But his sister continues. She sees that this is still Gregor, and while his family doesn't so much, right? And we still see his father continually kind of angry at him for whatever reason. So there's this excerpt, and it says, this was how Gregor now received his food each day, once in the morning when his parents and the maid were still asleep, and the second time after everyone had eaten lunch, for his parents would always nap a little afterward, and his sister would send the maid out on some errand or other. Surely they didn't want Gregor to starve either, but perhaps it would have been too much for them to experience his meals through more than hearsay. Perhaps his sister wanted to spare them even this modest sorrow, for Lord knows they were suffering enough. So his parents didn't want to hear him eating. It's probably gross. But his sister, continued to take care of him. So let's fast forward a little bit. There's a scene where Gregor's parents are talking, amongst themselves with the sister about what should we do with the things in his room. Gregor was in there the whole time, and they were they were feeling like he didn't have enough space. He's a bug now, he's crawling around the walls. Eventually they decide to come in and move his furniture, and so they start taking it out, right? And there's that moment where Gregor realizes this is happening, and he like scurries onto the wall and like jumps over one of the pictures and scares his mom, and she goes running out. Point being that they're slowly dehumanizing him, right? They're slowly making him more and more outcast by taking away those parts of him that made him feel human. Now let's fast forward a little bit further to the point where Gregor starts to notice that he's a little less of a human inside of a bug, and he's a little bit more of just a bug. He says he's starting to like scratch his back on the rug, and he just finds himself like carrying around pieces of hair and thread, and realizes like, I might be like a bug, and I don't know if I'm gonna come back. But then eventually even his sister starts to question whether or not he's Gregor anymore. We get this scene, and she says, "Dear parents," his sister said, striking the table by way of preamble, "things cannot go on like this, even if you two perhaps do not realize it. I most certainly do. I'm unwilling to utter my brother's name before this creature, and therefore will say only we have to try to get rid of it." So she was the one feeding him. She was the one taking care of him. But ultimately, she saw him every day, and she started to, question, is this something I can keep doing? She, to the point where she even said, I can't even utter his name. This is not Gregor. This is not my brother. This is some creature, and it needs to go. So then what happens next? Of course, his sister hides in his room, and, they had these renters come look at the house, because his father needed more income, and so was asking for them to, rent out this room. And by then they were done. They were done with the bug being Gregor. It was just a bug. So his sister waited in his room. He went in there, lights were off. She pounced on him, and his legs, crumbled beneath him. And then he had this slow bug death. Not only his feelings of ostracization, I don't know if that's a word. Not only his feelings of just being an outcast, but just his thoughts on work life and feeling obligated to be this business executive and, do that world instead of pursuing what he really wanted to. And that's pretty representative of, sort of post-industrialization and what people are going through in modernism, right? So, spot on. Okay, so let's talk now about Lu Xun. He is a Chinese writer, writing really kind of in the early 1900s, sort of right before World War I or in the World War I era. And what he sought to do was to criticize Chinese traditional culture. So those old Chinese folk tales, those old Chinese medicines, Lu Xun was a doctor. He was practicing medicine, and so he wanted to sort of do away with those old wives' tales, those old traditional remedies that were non-scientific, non-medical. And so we see him criticize that. Another story that he wrote was called Medicine, where he sort of criticized this folk remedy that people could cure tuberculosis by eating human blood. So this family feeds their son this bread filled with human blood, hoping that that's going to cure tuberculosis. But then, of course, a few days later, he just doesn't make it. All the while, of course, people around this family are saying traditional medicine, and that's competing with this idea of actual medicine. People are saying go to a doctor, and they're like, no, we know how to do this with blood. In Diary of a Madman, then, we have this sort of nameless character, I guess we'll call him the younger brother, and it's about him and his elder brother. And his elder brother, is trying to convince him that they are part of this culture of cannibals. And the younger brother, of course, is distraught by that, because he's realizing that his family and, their immediate, their neighbors, like this culture that they're from, eats people. Then the obvious question is, well, I grew up with these people. Were we eating people then? Because I didn't know about it. His brother answers yes. In fact, you ate our sister. And of course the story goes on, and we get more and more of his sort of journal entries where he's seeing things around him. He's questioning, okay, what's going on here? Like, are these people eating people or not? He's confused because he doesn't know if he should believe his brother or not. and he's asking other people. He asked that elderly woman, tell me what is going on, and she's super cryptic about it. He doesn't want to tell him. She says, if I tell you this, something bad's gonna happen. We can't talk about this. We can't talk about the old ways. So he is left to just wonder. And of course, his brother's egging him on the whole time. What is he supposed to think? And then eventually he gets to the end where he says, can't think about it anymore. I just realized today that I too have muddled around for a good many years in a place where they've been continually eating people for 4,000 years. Younger sister happened to die at just the time when elder brother was in charge of the house. What's to say he didn't slip some of her meat into the food we ate? What's to say I didn't eat a few pieces of my younger sister's flesh without knowing it, and now it's my turn? So what he's saying there is this something that happened, and do I now have to be a part of this because this is my family? But he ends by saying, maybe there are some children around who still haven't eaten human flesh. Save the children. Think about the children! Long story short, we could talk more about what happens in, all these various journal entries, but really it's just this gradual progression, and there's some other significant moments, but I'll leave that for you guys to talk about briefly when we meet next time. Let me wrap up by saying, again, I'm sorry that this is a bit late. Hopefully I can get this all edited and to you quickly. To reiterate what you're doing, let me show you where the discussion post is. So in Blackboard, if you go to the discussion, you'll see here it says discussion on fantasy, and there are your questions. So you're going to read the article, asking you what does the article say about the purpose of fantasy to culture, and what purpose do you think fantasy serves to readers and viewers in today's culture? So you're going to answer those, and then what you're also going to do is respond to some classmates. So you're going to do about a 150 to 200 word response. From there, once you've posted, you'll be able to see your classmates' posts as well, and then you can go and you can reply. And really, you're just, saying things like, oh, fantastic idea. I agree with that. That's very insightful. I think that that's blah, 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 so, and whatever. Is there a word count on your responses? No. But if you give one sentence responses, that's not really a response. I want you to read it and kind of consider oh, what are they thinking and why? More thing, there have been a lot of questions about the weekly discussion posts. And so let me clarify. What you're reading for the following week is what's due in the discussion post that week. So what I mean by that is we're reading Call of Cthulhu and those stories by Ursula Le Guin for discussion on Monday. But what I'd like for you to do is have those read before class and complete the discussion post by Sunday at midnight. What that does is it gives you an opportunity to say what you think before we get in the classroom setting and there's all this discussion, and now your opinions have been adulterated by others' opinions. So really, I just want to know what you think before that happens. So I'm sorry that's been confusing, but just to clarify, the things that we're reading for next Monday are the things that you should be posting about in this week's discussion post at the end of the week. If you have questions, let me know, but also in the discussion post, I've tried to list the stories that you're responding to just to make that a little more clear. So hopefully you're doing okay with that, but if you're not, again, feel free to ask questions. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys on Monday. Peace out.